Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section of my Q&A videos or have sent to me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. I wanted to put a plug in this week for the podcast that I did this last week here with my good friend Ruth McLeod. I think this was one of the best ones we've done yet. We've done 9 of these podcast episodes, and I'm plugging this one because I think that it was the most thoughtful and the most the one that feel like I actually got some good points of critical thinking in on it. And if you haven't checked out my podcast yet, then please do so. You can find it here on my YouTube channel or at sensiblyspeaking.com. It is the Sensibly Speaking podcast. All right, so we've got a lot of really good questions to take up this week, and we're going to get right to it. Here we go. Jonathan Mark. You do not display anger on your videos. You smile and chuckle at the silliness of it all, including your own silliness. Are you mad at your parents for having temporarily become Scientologists in the first place, and possibly leading you to become one? Are you mad at the Church of Scientology, people you worked for or with in the church? I'm pretty optimistic by nature and generally in a pretty good mood about things, despite all of the nonsense that's happened to me in my life. I just feel like that's the better way to approach life, so that's how I kind of do it. So as far as my parents go, I'm not mad at them, not even a little bit. My parents have been a major part of my recovery process. In fact, they've been there for me every step of the way and have been wonderful, wonderful people to me in this. And of course, they got themselves, away from organized Scientology and from the Church of Scientology themselves on their own bat before I did. So there's no anger or animosity there at all about them, having been conned into Scientology and fallen for it and worked for it and done all the things they did. And then, of course, because they thought at the time that it was the best thing for me, they suggested I do it, and I went in and found out for myself what it was and got on board on my own, of my own free will. So no, nothing toward my parents. As far as the Church of Scientology itself goes, yes, I'm not happy with the Church of Scientology. I'm not neutral towards the Church of Scientology. I'm pretty upset about the Church of Scientology. It's a very upsetting organization. The things they do are it's an institutional evil in the same way that Nazi Germany and the Nazi Party was an institutional evil. And I know Godwin's Law, and I'm invoking it already and bringing up the Nazis and Hitler, but I'm sorry, it's an apt analogy. I could just as easily say Stalinist Russia. Back in the day, there was an institutional evil. And by that I mean the people individually, you can sit down with them, you could have a beer with them, you could talk to them, they're perfectly good people. And yet they do horrible, awful, evil things. And sometimes they're aware of those horrible and awful and evil things that they're doing, and sometimes they're not. I'd say, in fact, probably most of the time they're not, because they're brainwashed. They're under a control system. They are under undue influence. And they don't really understand, what they're doing. Doesn't give them a pass, doesn't make what they're doing any less evil. I don't mean to say it that way. I just mean that in understanding what's going on there, it's not a good picture. It's not a good situation. What goes on with Scientology, Hubbard's policies, Hubbard's technology, Miscavige and the way he runs the show and has for decades. It's an institutional evil. Now, given all that, there are some people in Scientology that I doubt that I will ever forgive. Should it even come up that they ask me for forgiveness, which I severely doubt with these people. I'm talking about a handful of people. I'm not talking about a lot of people. There are people who have made it their life's work to ruin other people's lives, and to do that knowingly, willingly, with full and complete knowledge of what they're doing. I'm talking about people, say, at the Office of Special Affairs, very specific individuals, very specific individuals who work in Scientology's what's called the senior HCO branch, which is their justice branch, the people who are responsible for instituting Scientology's justice system, like declaring people, making sure that people are disconnected from. There are Scientologists, public Scientologists, who patrol Facebook and make sure that people aren't connected with people who are not in good standing and things like that. There are people who make sure that disconnection is kept a reality. Those are evil people. I'm sorry, but there's just no other word for it. They are black-hearted, evil people, and they are doing bad, and they're doing it on purpose. And I cannot forgive them for what they're doing because I've had too much personal loss with that. I'm not talking about your run-of-the-mill Scientologist. I'm not talking about your average Joe Scientologist who just kind of goes along with the flow. Those are not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who know what they're doing and they do it anyway. They know it's disruptive. They know they're breaking up families. They know they're ruining people's lives, and they don't care. I don't see why I should ever extend the hand of friendship or warmth to them. And frankly, I am pretty angry at them for what they do. So that's my honest from the heart answer to that. Kirsta, what do you think is the value of exposure? I assume it is a good thing for people to be aware of what horrible things Scientology is doing, but I think it isn't that clear with other issues. For example, sharing links about suffering and social issues on Facebook instead of doing something tangible like donating. Or even pirating movies and arguing that advertising those movies to your friends makes that okay or even better than actually paying for them. Do you think that position is defensible, or is it just a way to soothe your soul, to trick yourself into thinking you are helping without actually spending effort or money? It's kind of impossible to engage in any kind of social, political, religious, any kind of activism without making other people aware of, what it is that you're being an activist about. And oftentimes, many people out there who are very good-hearted people and want things to be better are simply not aware of what's going on. And some people, when they find out what's going on in some area that is of interest to them, they become the activists themselves, and they do donate, and they do give of their time and their energy and try to take on that cause as their own. So I think that social activism on Facebook or on social media is well placed when it's honestly done, and when it's done especially in a non-antagonistic fashion, in an open fashion where you're welcoming people or trying to get people to assist in whatever cause it is that you're pushing for. I have no problem with that, and I think that's a very defensible position. Because how can people help if they don't know what the problem is? How can people help if they don't know who to contact or what to do? It takes activism, and it takes that push, to push things into people's faces. Because let's face it, through advertising, media, and the panoply of things that we're assaulted with every day, you got to push through a lot of that in order to reach the people you want to reach. I have a kind of a hard time connecting the dots between that kind of activism and pirating movies, or trying to say that you're advertising somebody's intellectual property and therefore justifying ripping them off. I don't think those two things are very defensible. I think we've all done it to some degree or varying shades of it. I've been guilty of doing some of that. And I certainly don't justify it by saying that I'm, helping to advertise their movies or the music or whatever. I don't have any such pretenses, and I wouldn't say that there is any defensible position there. When you're doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong, and so I think that's a whole different matter. And I don't think that's the kind of exposure that is at the same level or of the same kind as activism, where you're taking up a cause. And, not everybody's going to agree with everybody's causes, There's all kinds of causes out there that people have on all ends of the political, religious, and social spectrums. And I think by their nature, you're going to always run into disagreement with that and that sort of thing. So you're not always going to get broad agreement on the activism that you're doing. But I think people have a right to do it. And I think that exposure in that vein is a good thing. Alex Cross. Chris, my question is, what would a parent do if they wanted to kidnap their child out of Scientology? This is something that I would never, ever give advice or agree with or agree on, because it's not the way to go about getting somebody out of a destructive cult. You do not kidnap them. You do not break the law. You do not do anything, any such thing. And I would never, ever promote or agree with that. In the same way that I wouldn't agree with kidnapping somebody into a cult. You know, when you're kidnapping is, I mean, you're just forcing somebody to do something against their will. You're never going to get somebody out of an undesirable mental situation or under, people who are under undue influence or hypnotism or brainwashing or whatever term you want to use for this. You're not going to bust them out of that by force. It's going to be love and caring and compassion and information that's going to get them out of that frame of mind. And you can only deliver that when you have somebody who's willing to listen to you. So my advice to parents who have children who are in Scientology, or their children are in Scientology, and they want to get them out, would be to talk to them with caring and love and compassion and understanding. You can't antagonize somebody out of a cult. You can't hate somebody out of a cult. You can't argue somebody out of a cult, with hate speech or something. It doesn't work. And what you have working against you in that case is human nature. We resist that when people do that. If we strongly believe in something, and somebody comes at you antagonistically or hostilely and tells you how wrong you are, what do? We put up our backbones and we fight back. That's what we do. It's just instinct. So that's not how you're going to get somebody out of a cult situation. Steve Hassan has gone over this in his book, Combating Cult Mind Control. It's a great book. I can't recommend it enough because he talks about this exact thing. And so to any parents or anybody who has friends or family in a cult, like Scientology or any other destructive cult, I highly recommend getting that book and reading it. And short of that, going to YouTube and watching videos or presentations on what a destructive cult is, how it works, so you'll have the ammunition you need to deal with it appropriately. And that's how you do it. You do it with that. You don't do it with breaking the law or being violent or kidnapping people. Inoculated. I've been wondering about the recent media site in Los Angeles. I know David Miscavige can use it to extract more funds. We're under attack. We need to disseminate to the world. Just curious about your thoughts on what kinds of films might come out of that site and what they're going to do with the INT media site. Okay, another speculative question is it possible DM is getting ready to ditch the Hemet properties, partly to completely erase its connection to the RPF, and partly to hunker down somewhere else? That would be another reason for moving SO personnel out to orgs. Okay, there's a lot here, and I'm going to try to give some summary answers because, frankly, I could do a whole nother video presentation on just this question because there's a lot here. As far as the Scientology Dissemination Media Center that's in Hollywood, California, it's about a mile away from the big blue buildings in Hollywood. I think that he's going to keep that from opening for as long as possible to soak up as much money as possible in donations, just like they did with the Superpower building in Florida, that big monstrosity of a building that they have down in Clearwater that's pretty much devoid of people all the time. That project, they sucked money up for that thing for 13 years, 15 years? 20 years, something like that, like a god-awful amount of time. They purchased the property, did groundbreaking on it and made money on that before they finally were forced to open the doors for well over a decade, maybe two. And I don't see any reason why Miscavige would change that operating pattern that he has for the Scientology Media Center in Hollywood. Because let's face it, what are they going to do when they open that thing? They're not going to broadcast Scientology materials 24/7. How could they? It's going to be, I think if anything, it's probably going to be the equivalent of a cable, local cable access show, because they're not going to have the money to do international broadcasting. I don't think anybody in the Scientology world realizes how much money it costs to do a CNN type station or a cable show that actually has international distribution. It is a lot of money. More money than Scientology actually has to spend on it. So I think they're just spinning their wheels, and I think they're sort of taking advantage of Scientologists' gullibility, so that they think that they're going to open the doors of this thing and start broadcasting Scientology on the airwaves through radio and through TV or cable or movie production, and it's going to go nowhere. It's going to fall flat, just like everything that David Miscavige touches. Everything this guy does, he's like a poison Midas. It's like everything he touches just turns to awfulness, and that's all that's going to happen with this. There's no demand for Scientology in the world. Scientology's public relations image, correctly so, is that of a destructive, mind-controlling cult, because that's what it is, and it's a money-making scam. So how do you get a TV station to start broadcasting all these fluffy-duffy shows about how wonderful Scientology is when everybody knows that's not what it is? And it's just a Google search away to find that out. This is not, some arcane, hard to figure out sort of thing. So I see that this media center is really just another way for Miscavige to suck the Scientologists dry of as much money as he can get out of them. And that's really what's going on there. If that place opened this year or next year, I would be amazed. And as far as, let's say it did open, I think you're going to see, at most some cable TV shows or commercials or little shorts or something about how wonderful Scientology is. And they're going to broadcast that stuff for maybe an hour or two. And it's not going to reach an international audience because they don't have the money for that. I think it would be local, maybe Los Angeles, maybe US, maybe. And that's it. So that's sort of within my knowledge of and understanding of the framework of media and media costs and media production, that's my speculation on that. As far as the Hemet property, now you're talking about management now, in Scientology International Management, which is located in Hemet, California, about 2 hours away from Los Angeles by driving. I don't think he's going to sell off that base or close it off, because he's got people there who know way too much about the inner workings of what goes on, because that base is ground zero for Scientology. That is where Scientology emanates from. And there are people there who have been in Scientology and been around since David Miscavige took over. They know everything. He can't afford to let those people just wander off. And he can't send them out to orgs, like was done in LA org, where they man the whole thing up with Sea Org members. He can't do that with those people. We're talking about, long-term veteran Sea Org members who know, a lot of his dirty laundry. So he needs to keep them under his thumb, and he needs to keep them under control. And short of that, if they, ever come to their senses and want to leave, then he needs to be able to put them under non-disclosure agreements that have teeth and pay them off with enough money that they'll keep their damn mouths shut. And that's, I think, about as far as David Miscavige has thought through as to what to do with those people. But I don't think I don't really see it as a realistic or viable idea that he's going to close down int management or the gold base or sell off that property or try to get rid of those people. I don't think that's where he is at. I think he is in a position of correct correctly having some fear of what would happen if those people got out and told their stories, because you have Mike Rinder and you have Mark Rathman, who were at that level, who got out, and they did tell their stories, or at least they told an awful lot of what they knew. They didn't tell everything they knew, but they've certainly told an awful lot. And look at all the fallout. It's been tremendous. It's been huge. And there are 20, 30, 40, maybe 100 more people just like them still there. So does he want another 100 Mark Rathmans and Mike Rinders out there? I don't think so. And Mark Headley's, who wrote Bone for Good. I mean, Mark Headley blew the whistle before Mike and Marty even did. I mean, that was big whistleblowing, and it was significant, and a lot of people paid attention. So, you can only imagine that if you were David Miscavige, you'd want to keep those people under your thumb. So that's kind of where I think he's coming from on all of that. So there you go. The Elizabethan. Why is it that Sea Org members cannot date, even casually, with public Scientologists? Why not state it up front to public instead of spinning one's wheels? It's kind of a funny question, because I don't know that they don't state it up front. I think it's always been very clear that Sea Org members don't have any sort of fraternization or intimate relations with anybody who's not in the Sea Org. And the reason for that is because the Sea organization needs to be a disciplined, controlled, tightly managed unit. And if you have people who aren't Sea Org members coming in and influencing Sea Org members, you're going to get those Sea Org members to want to go, because they're married to somebody who's watching TV and listening to radio and having a job and making money and having all the things that Sea Org members have given up and have said they don't need and they don't want and they don't have to have. And if you were in an intimate relationship with a non-Sea Org member, that wouldn't even really work, because the whole Sea Org lifestyle is on a base. Your uniform, your food, your pay, like all of that stuff is very controlled. It's all about control, really. It's a very controlled environment. So that's why they're not allowed to do any of that, and because it would just suck the Sea Org member right out. And it used to be that there were non-Sea Org staff, and there were a couple instances I knew of where a Sea Org member had gotten into an intimate relationship with a non-Sea Org member, and it didn't work out. It was a disaster. So that's why they don't do that. And I thought they'd always been really clear about that. So if I'm mistaken about that, or there was some instance where it wasn't clear, just let me know. David Schlesinger. Chris, do members of the Sea Org chat amongst themselves, asking each other, what is going on? This isn't making sense. Yeah, of course they do, all the time. Sea Org members are human beings, and they very definitely have reactions and questions and confusions, and they see some of the nonsense that goes on in the Sea Org, and they're like, what the hell is this? And we used to do that all the time. But you're in an environment, in a situation where you can't do that too much. You can only do that with people that you trust, and mostly under times of stress, that kind of thing comes out, because there's a whole reporting system that goes on within Scientology, where people will report in writing on other people to ethics officers, and these guys take their job seriously. And if somebody is found to be disaffected or nattering, as they call it, complaining bitterly about work conditions or situations or executives of the Sea Org or something like that, they come down hard on that stuff, and you'll get punished for it. You'll get physical work, you'll have makeup stuff to do, you'll be up all night, scrubbing pots and stuff. I mean, they take that stuff seriously. So it's not like one instance of this is going to send you to the RPF or some nonsense. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are consequences, and you have to be aware of those consequences, and you have to, and you learn as a Sea Org member that those consequences are real, and that you learn how to be cautious about who you say what to. But that doesn't mean that people don't say stuff, because they certainly do. My wife and I used to complain to each other about stuff all the time. Or I had friends who, you could just sort of look at each other and just be like, you know, type of thing. And because you just get sick and tired of all the nonsense that goes on sometimes. But, you know, you bury it, you suppress it, and you carry on because everybody there thinks that they're fighting the good fight and they have faith in the leadership. They think David Miscavige actually knows what he's doing and that he's a good leader and that he is carrying Scientology forward, you know, according to L. Ron Hubbard's wishes. And so they put up with it. And they are dead wrong for doing so because that's not what's going on. But they don't know that. Billy Joe Copesel. Did you discover things you weren't supposed to know at your level? And if so, how did that affect you? Were you disappointed with the OT levels when you learned about them after you left? Well, yeah, I did learn about some things that I wasn't supposed to know. You know, before I left the Sea organization, I'd heard the word Xenu. I'd seen it in writing, and I'd seen some reference to DC-8s or something. You know, I'd seen a little bit of that, but I was trying to, you know, not look, and I was afraid that I'd seen too much. You know, but I kind of tried to avoid that sort of thing in terms of OT levels and the levels I wasn't supposed to know about. Because I'm assuming that's what you're asking about here. I mean, internally, did I see things above my level or see things that I wasn't supposed to see while I was in Scientology or in the Sea Org related to maybe the bureaucracy of Scientology or the management of Scientology? Yeah, I saw some issues I wasn't supposed to see, like things that Hubbard had written that weren't for my level, they were for this level, you know, sort of things. Or you hear stuff, you know, but you know, you kind of tune it out or try not to pay too much attention to that. But at the same time, you're kind of curious and you kind of want to know. So, you know, sure, that happened. But in terms of the OT levels, that was all that I ever saw on the internet while I was still in the Sea Org. After I got out of the Sea Org and after Scientology started persecuting me and treating me like a, you know, second or third class citizen just because I had left the Sea organization and just because I was trying to have my own life and make my own way and still be a Scientologist, by the way, at that time, you know, they were really coming down on me. And it was very upsetting to me and it was very confusing. And so that drove me more and more to the internet to find out more and more about it. And the last thing I looked at that sort of pushed me over the edge of no longer really thinking with or wanting to be a Scientologist was when I saw the OT levels. I downloaded them and I went, okay, here we go, I'm going to take the plunge. And I opened that document up and I started reading and I read OT1 and OT2 and OT3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and I read about the L's and, you know, the L rundowns. And because it's all one big, huge, you know, download. And to say that I was disappointed would be an understatement. I was pissed. I was actually very, very upset because the thing is, I had been, I'm an expert on Scientology technology. I really do understand almost all of it at one level or another and had been exposed to, you know, almost all of it. The non-OT level stuff, the non-confidential stuff, I'd read and seen so much of the lower level material of Scientology in the 27 years that I was involved with it. I was fascinated by it and I thought Hubbard really knew what he was talking about. I know how crazy that sounds, but it made sense to me and I thought that it worked and I knew that there were parts that were logically inconsistent and I knew that there were parts that weren't wholly sensible. And that there were big, huge gaps and holes in the technology that didn't ever get filled by Hubbard. Big, huge questions about stuff. But there was so much there that, and you always kind of could tell yourself, well, I haven't read everything, so maybe Hubbard does answer some of those questions elsewhere. Anyway, my point is that I had been very familiar with all of that lower level material, all the stuff going up to the state of clear, you know, from nowhere to clear. That's not confidential. And I knew that material and I knew it well. So when I saw the OT material, it was logically inconsistent with the lower level material. It didn't fit one to the next. And the material at the OT levels was also, itself not logically consistent within itself. It was ramblings and it was nonsense. BTs and this is what's supposed to provide OT powers. I mean, it didn't make any sense, you know. How is it that by ridding yourself of body thetans, you would gain telepathy and mental powers and abilities? And how would it be that by getting rid of BTs, you would become cause over life? How do those two things go together? They don't go together at all. You know, I could see the benefit of getting rid of BTs if you had them, but that doesn't provide you with your own spiritual rehabilitation. It just is ridding you of stuff. So how is that supposed to provide you with this end result of it, which is that you are now cause over life? It just didn't make any sense, much less the earlier, the OT3 end result is freedom from overwhelm. Well, okay, so you get rid of a bunch of BTs and now you're supposed to not be overwhelmed anymore, only to find when you do OT4 and OT5 and OT7 that you've got millions more BTs to deal with. So how are you not still overwhelmed? Like that doesn't, like I said, these things just don't, these questions and answers, they don't logically make sense. They're not logically consistent. And you would think if you're dealing with the very nature of life itself and the universe and how these things work and how you as a spiritual being work and who you are and where you've been and what you're all about, all of this should make sense. It shouldn't be bringing up 10 times more questions than it's answering. And it shouldn't be that you have to go in session so it will suddenly make sense to you because the needle will move. That's just crap, you know. That's not the real answers to life. Wouldn't look that way, at least not to my way of thinking, and that's why I was very, very upset when I finally, after 27 years, saw this material that I'd been fighting and working and slaving and sacrificing so that other people could have benefit from them, because I never benefited from them when I was in Scientology. I never got to the OT levels, and the way I was going, it was going to be another 20 years before I ever did get to them. And I wasn't willing to do that anymore, which is why I left the Sea Org. And I still wanted to do it, right? But anyway, after all that time, to find out that was the crap that people were paying tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do, and then they were sort of smiling at you and telling you how wonderful and great and stupendous it was, it just didn't make any sense. And I knew that suddenly all these OT people that I had been talking to for all these decades were deluding themselves, you know, because it just doesn't make sense. So that was my reaction to that. And it was the final nail in the coffin for me in my belief and faith in Scientology. After that, I knew that it was nothing. So there you go. Okay, and so we've come to the end of another Critical Q&A episode. This has been a lot of fun answering these questions, and if you have any questions or comments for me, please leave them in the comments section below in this video, or email me at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. And again, I'll plug my podcast. And now that my interview with Robin has run its course, I've got new content coming, and should be pretty interesting stuff. Got a lot of things coming here, and I'm also still working on that book. I am actually writing a book. It is coming along. It's well over halfway done. I hope to get it done in the very near future. I actually have some pretty stiff timetable set for myself to get this thing pounded out. It will be an ebook, and that's coming. So stay tuned, and thank you very much for watching.